After a lifetime of saving, a grandmother saw her community's only youth arts center shuttered overnight by a presidential decree, her heartbroken plea for the children reaching the one person who refused to let their dreams be the final cost. Pauletta Washington. Before the final note of her speech had even finished echoing in the cavernous, generator-lit theater, the internet had already delivered its verdict. The clip, shot on a dozen trembling cell phones and one professional camera streaming live, became a digital wildfire. News networks, initially ignoring the small Baltimore event, broke into their primetime programming to show the footage. On screen, Pauletta Washington, a figure known for her grace and poise, stood on a makeshift stage, her voice cracking with an unscripted, raw emotion that sliced through the political noise. Within minutes, social media feeds were a cascade of the same 15-second snippet. The White House, which had hours earlier dismissed the event as insignificant, was caught utterly flat-footed, its press office switchboard lighting up, with calls from every major news organization in the country demanding a response. 5 days earlier, the only light in the Harmony Arts Haven was the pale, indifferent glow of a Tuesday morning filtering through the dusty front windows. Laura Vance, a woman whose 72 years were etched in the gentle lines around her eyes but not in the spirit that moved her, ran a hand over a wooden costume trunk. The worn leather and brass felt like an extension of her own memory. For 2 decades, this former textile warehouse in a forgotten corner of Baltimore had been her life's work. She had bought it with the last of her husband's life insurance and her own retirement savings, transforming its cavernous, empty shell into a sanctuary of paint, music, and light. Here, children from the surrounding row houses, kids the school system had often written off, learned to play the violin, to control their breath for a monologue, to see the world not just as it was, but as it could be, through the lens of a camera. The letter had arrived yesterday. It was cold, official, and brutally efficient. It spoke of fiscal responsibility and programmatic consolidation. It used phrases like realignment of federal arts endowments and termination of non-essential grant funding. It was a death certificate printed on government letterhead. The small but vital federal grant that covered the building's crippling utility bills and property taxes, a grant Ilara had successfully applied for every year for the past 15 years under 3 different presidents, was gone. Not next year. Not next month. Effective immediately. The grant was a casualty of the newly signed One Big Beautiful Bill Act, a sweeping piece of legislation that President Donald Trump had championed as the ultimate tool for cutting government waste. Ilara had spent the previous day in a daze, making calls to faceless bureaucrats in Washington, D.C., each one a journey into a maddening labyrinth of automated menus and polite, powerless assistants who offered sympathy but no solutions. "I'm sorry, ma'am, the decision is final," was the recurring, soul-crushing refrain. The disappointment was a physical weight. It wasn't for herself. Her own needs were small. It was for Leo, a 10-year-old boy who had arrived at the Haven a year ago, so painfully shy he would only communicate by drawing on a small notepad. Last week, he had stood on the small stage and recited a 2-minute poem he'd written himself, his voice wavering but clear. It was for Aaliyah, a teenager with a fiery temper who had found an outlet in welding scrap metal into soaring, beautiful sculptures instead of in the back alley fights that had nearly landed her in juvenile hall. Now the electricity was scheduled to be cut off by the end of the week. The doors would be padlocked. The disappointment felt like a betrayal. Not by a person, but by an entire system that had suddenly declared the one thing she knew to be valuable as worthless. In a final act of desperation, she called the one local news reporter who had ever bothered to cover their annual student showcase. He came, filmed a short, melancholy 2-minute segment that aired late that night, and left. It felt like a eulogy. Hundreds of miles away, in the quiet comfort of her Los Angeles home, Pauletta Washington was doing what she often did late at night, catching up on the world beyond the curated bubble of Hollywood. She scrolled past the national headlines and the political shouting matches, her attention drawn to the smaller, quieter stories that often held more truth. She had a knack for finding them, foreseeing the human cost buried beneath the policy debates. An algorithm, perhaps sensing her interest in arts and education charities, surfaced the clip from the Baltimore news station. It was grainy, poorly lit. It showed an elderly black woman, Alara Vance, standing in the middle of a darkened room, surrounded by silent pianos and canvases draped in white sheets as if in mourning. Alara wasn't crying. She wasn't shouting. Her voice was steady, imbued with a profound, aching sadness. "I just don't understand," she said to the reporter, her gaze sweeping across the dormant studio. "They say it's a luxury, but for these children, this place is bread, this place is water. Where do they go now?" Pauletta hit pause. She replayed the clip. And then, a third time, she saw in Alara's face the faces of countless women she'd known her whole life. Women who held families and communities together with sheer will and uncelebrated grace. She saw the quiet dignity in her refusal to rage, a dignity that made the injustice of her situation even more stark. The phrase, "This place is bread," echoed in her mind. It was a line more powerful than any screenwriter could have crafted. This wasn't a political issue to her. It was a wound. In Washington, D.C., President Trump was celebrating. On a massive stage in front of a roaring crowd, he held up a comically large, leather-bound copy of the bill he'd just signed. "We did it," he boomed, his voice reverberating across the rally grounds. "We've cut the fat, we've trimmed the waste, and we are stopping the radical left from wasting your money on their ridiculous pet projects." The crowd erupted. He was confident, triumphant, bathing in the adoration of his supporters. He was a million miles away from a dark theater in Baltimore, and the consequences of a single line of text in the 1,000-page bill he was holding. He had never heard the name Alara Vance, and he never would. He was insulated from her disappointment by layers of security, staff, and soaring approval ratings from his base. Pauletta Washington closed her laptop. The quiet of her home felt jarringly loud. She thought of her own children, of the opportunities they'd been given, the encouragement they'd received to pursue their passions. She thought of the arts programs she and her husband had funded, and the look in a child's eyes when they discovered a hidden talent. The clip of Alara Vance had lodged itself in her heart. To do nothing, to simply tweet her disapproval or sign a petition, felt like an act of complicity. It wasn't enough. She picked up her phone and dialed her assistant, a sharp, efficient woman named Maya, who was used to late-night calls but not usually with this tone in Pauletta's voice. "Maya," she said, her voice low but firm, "I need you to do something for me. There's a news report from a local station in Baltimore. The piece is about a community arts center being shut down. The Harmony Arts Haven. I need a name." "A woman named Alara Vance." There was a pause on the other end. "Found it," Maya said, her typing skills legendary. "I have a number for the center. It's probably disconnected." "Try it," Pauletta said. "And if it is, find her. I don't care how. I need to speak to her. And clear my schedule for the rest of the week. I think I need to go to Baltimore." The phone at the Harmony Arts Haven rang just as Alara was taping a final, heartbreaking notice to the front door. The sound was so unexpected it made her jump. She fumbled for the old cordless phone in her coat pocket, assuming it was the power company with a final warning. "Hello?" she answered, her voice tired. "Is this Ms. Alara Vance?" a voice asked. It was calm, professional. "This is Maya, calling on behalf of Pauletta Washington." Alara froze. She thought it was a prank call, a cruel joke. "Who?" "Pauletta Washington, the actress. She saw the news report about your center. She'd very much like to speak with you." Alara sank onto the cold steps of the entrance, the phone pressed hard against her ear. A few moments later, another voice came on the line. It was unmistakable, a voice she'd heard in movie theaters and on television for decades. But it was softer now, gentler. "Mrs. Vance? This is Pauletta. I am so terribly sorry about what's happened. Your words about that place being bread for those children, they moved me very deeply. I want to help. Pauletta arrived in Baltimore 2 days later, not with a flash of cameras or a press entourage, but in a simple black sedan that pulled up quietly to the curb outside the shuttered theater. She had asked for no publicity. This was not a photo opportunity. When Alara opened the heavy side door, the two women stood in silence for a moment. They were from different worlds, different lives, but they recognized something in each other instantly. A shared understanding of the quiet, tireless work of nurturing potential. Pauletta stepped inside. The air was cold and smelled of dust and linseed oil. It was a cathedral of silenced creativity. Pauletta didn't offer grand pronouncements or easy solutions. She walked through the space, touching a dusty piano key, running her hand over the armature of an unfinished sculpture. And mostly, she listened. For over an hour, Alara told her everything. She spoke of Leo and Aaliyah, of the annual holiday concert that was the pride of the neighborhood, of the quinceañera dresses she had helped sew for girls whose parents couldn't afford them, using the theater's old sewing machines. As Alara spoke, an idea began to form in Pauletta's mind. It was audacious, perhaps even foolish. "The holiday concert," Pauletta said softly. "When was it supposed to be?" "In 3 weeks," Alara replied, her voice catching. "It was going to be our biggest one yet." "Then we're still going to have a concert, Alara," Pauletta said, a new fire in her eyes. "We're not going to have a holiday concert. We're going to have a concert for Baltimore's future. Right here. In this building. We're going to turn the lights back on, if only for one night, and we're going to make sure the whole country is watching." The plan was a logistical nightmare. The building had no power. The city permits were a maze of red tape. And they had no money. But Pauletta Washington had something more valuable than a budget. A phone book filled with 3 decades of goodwill. Her first call was to a famous cinematographer she'd worked with. "I need a favor. I need a crew that can light a dark theater and stream it live. No budget. Just a good cause." The cinematographer didn't hesitate. "I'm in. My crew will be there." Her next calls were to musicians, actors, and artists. Some were superstars, some were journeymen. The story was the same each time. "I'm in Baltimore. There's a woman named Alara Vance." Most didn't even need to hear the rest of the sentence. They simply asked, when and where. The pushback came, as they knew it would, a mid-level official at the mayor's office, nervous about antagonizing the White House, raised issues with expired permits and safety codes. The story of Pauletta's involvement had leaked, and the administration in D.C. was paying attention. As the concert date approached, the White House press secretary was asked about it during a routine briefing. The question was meant to be a throwaway, but the response was pure gasoline on a fledgling fire. "The president believes that taxpayer money should fund essentials, not non-essential luxuries," the press secretary read from a prepared statement, his tone dripping with dismissive arrogance. "While we applaud private celebrity charity, the American people are tired of seeing their hard-earned dollars wasted on failing community programs that should be able to support themselves." The statement was a colossal blunder. It was exactly the kind of out-of-touch, condescending remark that transforms a local dispute into a national symbol. In Baltimore, Pauletta and Alara watched the clip on a laptop powered by a gas generator that now hummed just outside the theater's back door. Alara shook her head, the insult landing like a physical blow. "A luxury," she whispered, looking around the cavernous space where children had found their footing in the world. Pauletta reached out and placed a hand on her shoulder. "They just gave us our title," she said, her voice a low, determined hum. "Concert for Baltimore's future. A celebration of luxuries." The day of the concert arrived. It was cold and gray. A small but determined crowd of locals, parents, and former students had gathered outside, holding candles and handmade signs. Inside, the stage was stark, cheerless. It was lit by a few powerful, strategically placed Klieg lights, casting long, dramatic shadows. The power was from 3 humming generators, the lifeblood of their defiance. Boom! A single professional camera stood in the center aisle, its red light indicating that the livestream feed was active. On a monitor backstage, they watched the viewer count begin to climb. From hundreds to thousands, then tens of thousands. Maya rushed over, her eyes wide. Pauletta. Every major network has picked up the feed. Pauletta took a deep breath. She looked at Ilara, who nodded, her eyes shining with tears and a fierce, rekindled hope. She looked at Leo, who stood in the wings, clutching a new poem he had written for the occasion. It was time. The show began not with a celebrity, but with a child. Ilara Vance walked to the single microphone at the center of the stage, her small frame silhouetted against the bright lights. The theater, packed with community members, fell silent. The millions watching online leaned closer to their screens. "We have been called a luxury," Ilara said, her voice soft but clear as a bell, carrying through the cavernous space without a tremor. "Before we hear from our guests, I want to show you what that luxury looks like." She turned and gestured to the wings. 10-year-old Leo, who a year ago could barely make eye contact, walked out onto the stage. He was clutching a folded piece of paper in his hands, his knuckles white. He walked right past the microphone, standing at the very edge of the stage, as if he wanted to be as close to the audience as possible. He took a shaky breath and began to speak, his boyish voice filling the silence. "My voice was a secret," he began, his eyes fixed on a point at the back of the hall. "It lived in a box, inside my chest. I didn't have the key. I drew pictures of the key. I drew pictures of the box. I drew the monster guarding the box." Then Mrs. Ilara gave me a pencil, and she said, "A poem is a key made of words." So I wrote one, and another. This one is called The Loudest Room. The loudest room is not the one with shouting. It is the one with a new page. The loudest room is not the one with a band. It is the one with a wet paintbrush. My voice is not a secret anymore. This is the loudest room I've ever known. Thank you. He folded the paper, gave a small, shy bow, and walked quickly back into the wings, straight into Ilara's waiting arms. The applause was deafening. It wasn't polite. It was heartfelt, explosive. In that moment, Leo had done more to dismantle the White House's argument than any politician could have. He hadn't debated policy. He had offered a living, breathing testament to the center's purpose. Next, a Grammy-winning guitarist whom Pauletta had called personally sat on a simple stool and played. He didn't play one of his rock anthems. He played a soft, intricate acoustic melody that was melancholic and hopeful all at once. The music washed over the space, a soothing balm after Leo's raw, emotional testimony. It was a moment of quiet reflection, a bridge from the personal to the public. As the final notes faded, Pauletta Washington stepped from the wings. She wore a simple black dress, no jewelry, nothing to distract from her purpose. She walked to the microphone, her footsteps echoing. The camera zoomed in, capturing the quiet determination in her eyes. She waited for the applause to die down, letting the silence hang in the air for a beat longer than was comfortable. "Good evening," she began, her voice resonating with the warmth and authority that had made her a star. "I want to thank you all for being here, those of you in this room and those of you watching from your homes. A few days ago, this room was dark. It was silent. It was declared non-essential." She paused, letting the word land. "I saw a news report. I saw a woman named Ilara Vance, a woman who has poured her soul into this community, stand in this dark room and ask a simple question. Where do the children go now?" That question has been sitting with me ever since. She looked directly into the camera, and it felt as though she was speaking to every single person watching. We've all heard the official response from Washington. We've heard this place, and thousands of places like it, dismissed as a luxury. We've heard it called a waste of taxpayer money. I've been thinking a lot about those words. Waste. Luxury. She took a step closer to the microphone. "Let me tell you what I see. I don't see waste. I see a boy named Leo who found the key to unlock his own voice. I see canvases that will hold the dreams of children who are told too often that their dreams don't matter. I see a dusty piano that taught a young girl that her hands could create harmony instead of hurt. Is that a waste? Or is that a rescue mission? The crowd was utterly still, hanging on every word. And let's talk about luxury, she continued, her voice rising with passion. Is it a luxury to give a child a safe place to go after school? A place that isn't the street? Is it a luxury to teach a teenager that their anger can be channeled into a sculpture? Their sorrow into a song? Is it a luxury to build confidence? To foster discipline? To create a community where every child's story is worthy of being told? She shook her head, a look of profound, righteous indignation on her face. That is not luxury. That is necessity. That is the essential, fundamental work of building a healthy society. It is the work of raising human beings. She leaned into the microphone, her voice now dropping to a powerful, resonant whisper that carried more weight than a shout. So they can call it what they want from their gilded offices and their press podiums. They can sign their bills and issue their statements. But here, on the ground, in this room, we know the truth. She raised her head, her eyes blazing. They call this a luxury, but for a child who finds their voice on this stage, it is a lifeline. She paused for a single, heart-stopping beat, the silence in the theater absolute, and we will not let them cut it. For a moment, there was nothing. No sound. Then, the theater exploded. The applause wasn't just a sound. It was a physical force, a wave of catharsis and affirmation that seemed to shake the very foundations of the old building. Then, the people were on their feet, cheering, weeping, embracing. Outside, the crowd listening on speakers roared its approval. Online, the live stream's comment section was an unreadable blur of hearts, fire emojis, and declarations of support. Lara Vance stood in the wings, tears streaming down her face, not of sadness, but of a fierce, defiant joy. Pauletta simply stood at the microphone, letting the wave of sound wash over her, a quiet, unsmiling vessel for the community's reclaimed hope. Stepping off the stage felt like walking from a furnace into a freezer. The heat and energy of the crowd were replaced by the frantic, sterile efficiency of her small team. Maya was there, grabbing her arm, her face a mixture of exhilaration and panic. "Pauletta, you need to see this." She was already steering her toward a small, cinder-block room backstage that had been converted into a makeshift command center. Reporters were shouting her name from the main entrance, their camera flashes strobing against the windows. But a few local volunteers had formed a human chain to keep them at bay. In the back room, Maya held up her phone. "It's everywhere. CNN, MSNBC, Fox News. They all cut away to carry your speech live. The New York Times, Washington Post. They have push alerts out. Pauletta Washington challenges President Trump on arts funding." The feed peaked at over 4 million live viewers, and that's not counting the network broadcasts. Pauletta sank into a wobbly plastic chair, the adrenaline ebbing away, leaving a profound weariness in its place. It didn't feel like a victory. It felt like she had just pulled the pin on a grenade, and was now simply waiting. Later that night, the silence of her hotel room was a stark contrast to the noise of the past few hours. She had declined all interview requests, issuing a simple statement through Maya that tonight was about the Harmony Arts Haven and the voices of the children of Baltimore. She kicked off her shoes and sat on the edge of the bed, the city lights of Baltimore twinkling below, oblivious. Her phone buzzed. "It was Denzel," she answered, her voice barely a whisper. "Hey, you." "Hey, me?" "Pauletta, that was something else," he said. His voice was a familiar comfort, a deep, steady anchor in the storm she had just unleashed. "I'm so proud of you, you know that. You were magnificent." "I was terrified, Den," she confessed, the admission releasing a breath she didn't know she'd been holding. "My knees were shaking. I thought I was going to be sick right there on stage." "You'd never know it," he said gently. "You spoke the truth. That's why it was so powerful." There was a pause, and she knew what was coming next. "But Pauletta, you know what this means, don't you? You didn't just challenge a policy, you challenged him. You know what he does. They don't play fair. They will come after you. They will come after us, our family. It was the fear they had lived with quietly for years, the unspoken tax on their success and visibility. They had always navigated it carefully, choosing their battles, protecting their children from the harsh glare of public life. Tonight, she had walked directly into the center of the storm. "I know," she said, her voice heavy. "But when I saw that woman's face, when I heard those kids, what were we supposed to do? What kind of people would we be if we just sent a check and said nothing? If we have this platform and we don't use it when it matters, what's the point of any of it?" Before he could answer, there was a soft knock on her hotel room door. It was Maya, her expression grim. She held out a tablet. "I'm sorry to interrupt," she said quietly, "but I thought you should see this. I filtered out the worst of it, but..." Pauletta took the tablet. The screen was filled with screenshots from Twitter, from pro-Trump forums, from the comment sections of right-wing news sites. The victory she felt on stage just hours ago curdled in her stomach. The attacks were instant, vicious, and deeply personal. There were racist caricatures, her face crudely photoshopped onto vile, historical images. There were misogynistic tirades questioning her right to speak, calling her a Hollywood elite hypocrite. One user had posted the address of the school their youngest child attended. Another had created a meme using a still from one of Denzel's movies, twisting it into a threat. It was a digital mob, summoned by the dog whistles and outrage stoked by the president's political machine. It was exactly what Denzel had warned her about. The reality of the fight, stripped of the inspiring music and applause, was this: ugly, personal, and dangerous. She stared at the screen, at the torrent of anonymous hatred, and felt a chill that the hotel room's heating could not touch. The battle for the Harmony Arts haven was over for the night, but her own personal war had just begun. The week following the concert was a brutal lesson in the physics of modern politics. For every action, there is an equal and opposite overreaction. The White House, seeing the wave of positive sentiment for Pauletta, chose not to retreat but to attack. At a rally in a different state, President Trump went off script, his face contorting into a familiar sneer. "You see this washed-up Hollywood actress, Pauletta Washington?" he bellowed to the roaring crowd. "She hasn't had a hit in years. Now she's attacking your president because we stopped funding her snooty, failing, good-for-nothing little pet projects. She's an out-of-touch liberal elite telling you how to spend your money. Sad." The crowd booed on cue. The online mob, given their marching orders, intensified their assault. The narrative was successfully being framed as a simple, familiar culture war. A pampered celebrity versus a populist president. Pundits on cable news debated her motives, her husband's career, her right to have an opinion. The actual issue, the purpose and value of a small community center, was being buried under the avalanche of partisan noise. The shift came from the last place anyone expected. Governor Mark Miller of Ohio was a Republican of the old school, a pragmatic, gravel-voiced fiscal hawk. He was known for his obsession with balanced budgets and his allergy to political drama. During a routine press conference about a new state infrastructure bill, a young reporter from a local paper, hoping to get a viral soundbite, asked, "Governor, do you agree with the president that arts programs like the one Pauletta Washington is defending are a waste of taxpayer money?" Governor Miller stared at the reporter for a long moment, his expression unreadable. The room stilled. "I'm not a film critic, and I don't comment on the president's rally speeches," he began, his voice a low rumble. "But I am the governor of this state, and I believe in data." He gestured to an aide, who handed him a folder. 3 years ago, to close a budget shortfall, my administration cut state funding to a dozen community arts initiatives in our most at-risk school districts. It was a tough, unpopular choice, but we believed it was fiscally necessary. He opened the folder. In the 2 years that followed, the data shows a 15% increase in juvenile delinquency, a 7% rise in high school dropouts, and a measurable uptick in graffiti and vandalism in those specific districts. The social services and law enforcement costs associated with those trends far outstripped what we saved by the initial cut. He closed the folder and looked back at the stunned reporters. We have since restored that funding, working with private sector partners to create a more sustainable model. Mrs. Washington is a Democrat from Hollywood. I'm a Republican from the industrial Midwest. We probably don't agree on 99% of issues, but on the specific point that these programs are not luxuries for a community, my state's spreadsheets suggest she's absolutely right. Here in Ohio, we have learned that they are essential investments in our future workforce and our social stability. It was a political earthquake. The statement, delivered in Miller's unimpeachable, no-nonsense monotone, completely shattered the White House's narrative. It was no longer a simple partisan spat. He had given political cover for others to agree. Suddenly, the conversation wasn't about celebrity versus president. It was about data, results, and value. The story pivoted. Sensing the shift, Pauletta agreed to one final interview. She chose a respected, independent journalist known for her measured, in-depth reporting. They sat not in a television studio, but in the newly cleaned but still quiet library of the Harmony Arts Haven. The journalist, after a long and thoughtful conversation, asked the inevitable question. Mrs. Washington, your critics, including the president, insist this was a calculated political stunt, a way to attack him under the guise of charity. What do you say to them? Pauletta smiled, a calm, weary smile. This was never about one president or one political party, she said, her voice even and clear. I have seen arts programs thrive and suffer under administrations of both parties. For me, this began with one woman, Laura Vance, and her heartbroken plea for her children. It started with the question, where do they go now? She gestured around the library, where volunteers were now quietly reshelving books. This entire national debate has been framed around cost. I am asking us to have a more honest conversation about value. What is the value of a child's confidence? What is the value of a community that feels seen and invested in? You cannot put that on a spreadsheet, but as Governor Miller so bravely pointed out, you can certainly measure the cost of its absence. She leaned forward, her hands clasped. The government can and should be a partner in creating that value. But if it steps away, for whatever reason, this whole experience has taught me a powerful lesson. The people will step in. The people will fund the lifeline. That is my only political statement. And it is a statement of faith, not in a party, but in the decency of ordinary Americans. 3 weeks after the concert, the Klieg lights were gone, and the national news vans had moved on to the next crisis. But in the working-class neighborhood in Baltimore, the echo of that one night was very much alive. A crowdfunding campaign, launched anonymously by a single mother in Oregon who had been moved to tears by Leo's poem, had caught fire in the wake of Governor Miller's comments that had raised over $700,000. Local Baltimore businesses, shamed and inspired in equal measure, had stepped up. A construction union offered to rewire the entire building for free. The city's largest paint supplier donated enough paint to cover the warehouse twice over. Laura Vance now stood on the sidewalk, holding a new set of keys. The padlock was gone. The federal grant was still officially terminated, a line-item casualty of a distant political war. But in her hand, she held the proof of a different victory. She turned the key in the lock of the newly painted front door and pushed it open. The lights flickered on, not with the hum of a gas generator, but with the quiet, steady power of a paid electric bill. Inside, the space was filled with the cheerful noise of a community reclaiming its own. Volunteers were dusting off instruments, parents were assembling new furniture, and teenagers were laughing as they organized the costume department. In the main hall, a scaffold stood against the largest wall. On it was Leo. He was no longer the shy boy hiding in the corner. He was an artist in command, directing two other children, a brush in his hand, a streak of blue paint on his cheek. He was leading the creation of a massive mural. It was a sprawling, vibrant tree. Its deep roots were embedded in the boards of a stage, its thick trunk soared toward the ceiling, and its branches, instead of leaves, were bursting with symbols. Musical notes, paintbrushes, books, welding torches, and the classic masks of comedy and tragedy. And at the very heart of the tree's trunk, painted with meticulous care, was a single, solitary microphone, standing in a circle of golden light. A lasting echo, a permanent reminder of the night. A community was told it was a luxury, and decided, in one clear voice, to prove it was a lifeline. What is the true value of art in our communities, and who should be responsible for nurturing it? Let us know your thoughts in the comments below. And for more stories about people who refuse to be silenced, make sure you subscribe.